Oh, good. Now we're recording.
Checking the levels. All right, I think we're
just missed that last one.
Just missed it.
It was a good one, Joe. I'll give you credit for it.
That was prime pre-show material, and it's just lost to the ether forever and ever.
From ScienceSortOf.com, you're listening to Science Sort of.
To Science Sort of, you're listening to episode 301. Our theme this week is AGU Part 1, The Fifth Element. Joining me to talk about things that are science, things that are sort of science, and things that wish they were science is me, who I forgot to introduce. My name's Ryan, and I'll be your host today. And joining me to talk about things that are science, things that are sort of science, things that wish they were science, is Abe Padilla sitting next to me.
Hey-oh, we decided to do a live, in person in the same room this time.
And sitting next to my heart is Joe Batwinnis.
No, I'm in the same room too.
I'm right here.
Hey, Joe.
If only
I can
Joe.
feel you.
Hey,
How's it going?
pretty good.
It's been a while since we've had a Joe and Abe show. You guys were crushing it for a minute, and then there's been a bit of a hiatus. But
we wanted to give others an opportunity to also
Yeah.
hop in and discuss the awesome science.
It's very magnanimous of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can't always be the Joe and Abe show.
Yeah, I mean, you know, 1-2 punch over and over can get
It's too much.
too powerful.
Too powerful, he says.
Too much good stuff.
This week we're doing our first show from AGU. So, Joe, as you know, Abe and I are in the same room, and so we were able to go to AGU both as press for Science Sort of. Science Sort of had 2 reporters on call, standing by.
That's right. It was actually very exciting to attend AGU for me as
badges.
the first time as a press. It was an entirely new perspective for me to show up and be like, I'm not here to talk about my research or to sit and try to find people that I'm interested in talking to about my research, and instead just absorb, find out what we can talk about later in the show, but more importantly, who we can sit down and do a quick snippet with. So it was a lot of fun.
You guys were officially official.
Yeah.
We were officially official. And one of the things that happened at AGU this year was a screening for a movie that is now available on the various streaming platforms. The movie is called The Human Element, and it is not directed by, but starring and with a lot of the story told by nature photographer James Balog, who people might know from his previous documentary, Chasing Ice. And the people who are doing publicity for the movie actually reached out to us and asked if we wanted to see the movie in advance and talk to James about making the film. So Abe and I watched the film. Joe, sorry, we didn't.
Yeah. All of a sudden, I feel very left out.
Yeah, no, that next to you and my heart thing is sounding even more hollow.
Yeah.
So because Abe was the only person who responded in the Slack channel,
That is how I found out about it.
we watched the film and were able to talk to James, and that's the majority of this week's episode. So we're going to go ahead. It was a great conversation with James, all about making the film, and it's sort of. The film is called The Human Element, and the idea is that it's sort of 4 vignettes looking at the different ways climate change is going to affect the water that provides both, the liquid that we need to survive, but also the livelihood for people who live near and work on the water. The fire regime, the changing fire regime, changing air quality, how the soil, the earth that we've dug into for our current economic wealth has also had this really negative knock-on effect of putting carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So it's all about how those 4 fundamental elements tell the story of climate change in their own special way, and then this 5th element, which is the human element. And so that's our interview with James, and if you want to pause the show and actually go watch the movie, you can do that now. Like I said, it is already available on streaming, but we had a great conversation with James, and that's coming up.
Ryan, I'm going to need you to pause the podcast while you watch the show. I'll be right back in like 90 minutes.
So James Balog is a lapsed geomorphologist now slumming it as an award-winning photographer whose work focuses on the relationship between humans and nature. He's the author of 7 books, founder of the Extreme Ice Survey, and in his latest film, The Human Element, they explore how human activity has altered Earth's water levels, fire regime, air quality, and earth and energy resources. The film had an advanced screening at AGU's annual meeting in 2018 and will be officially released in North America on January 29th. Jim, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So since Abe and I are both earth scientists of a sort, I was hoping we could take a step back in time. And can you tell us what you did for your master's in geomorphology back in the day?
Yeah, well, I was incredibly interested in all things related to the mountains and the polar regions. And so I signed up for the Institute of Arctic and Alpine Research at the University of Colorado for my master's work. And I was flailing around looking for a thesis topic when the Big Thompson River flood happened in 1976. And that was a flash flood that went screaming down or roaring down this big canyon here in the foothills of the Rockies. And 145 people were killed in one night. And I did field work on the erosion and measured the quantities of sediment that were removed out of the canyon by the flood. I attempted to figure out the recurrence interval of the flood by some new methods that weren't based on hydrology per se, but were based on erosion. And then finally, I had the good fortune of doing my work just at the time Doppler radar was being tested and refined. And that very night, the National Weather Service, or whoever was operating that Doppler down at the airport in Denver, they were directing their instrument up into the clouds over the Big Thompson, and they had been able to map where the heaviest rainfall was. And so I could line up their rainfall maps with my sediment and erosion maps, and you could see pretty amazingly clearly how much rain it took to turn those all those tributary canyons from being these relatively peaceful, if wet, places into these roaring, raging torrents full of sand and boulders and stuff hammering downstream. So I was very, very, very fortunate as a guy in his early 20s to wind up with a thesis topic, a research topic like that. It was a miracle. And I wound up getting the thing published almost immediately in the Geological Society of America's lead journal, Geology. And I wound up with a picture that I shot on the cover of the journal. Who knew? Who expected that? Nobody. But there it was.
Wow, I actually thought I might catch you off guard a little bit with that question, but you clearly remember your work very well. And yes, I can verify for our audience that the Journal of Geology is one of the most, if not the most prestigious journal in the earth sciences. So very interesting work.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. I look back on some of these things and I can't imagine how all the pieces manage to fit together, but they do.
So getting into the human element a little bit, would you say that this new film is sort of a spiritual sequel to Chasing Ice, your previous film?
It's certainly a kindred spirit, let's say. The work with the ice that led to Chasing Ice. But let me back up a little bit. I want to emphasize that the Extreme Ice Survey is still going on. It's not done. Chasing Ice came out in 2012. We still have dozens of time-lapse cameras out in the field right now looking at receding glaciers. And those cameras are still out there against the expectation that that project was to have been a 3-year project. It should have ended in 2010, but it's still going because the record of what we're seeing is so spectacular and so interesting. So the Extreme Ice Survey goes on. And I realized that, there were a lot of aspects of the natural system that were changing around me. Certainly working on the Extreme Ice Survey and Chasing Ice made me think about lots of other things like, the air, fire, water. And I knew way back when we hadn't even finished Chasing Ice when I knew that, my God, I've got to tell some other stories here. There's other things that are happening. And so they eventually became the human element.
Okay, so that's perfect setup for the next question that I wanted to ask. The human element is, conceptually, you're telling these amazing stories about people in places that are severely affected by, ongoing climate changes. And it's not just recent. This has been going for many years. I imagine you interviewed and maybe thought about so many more places than what was featured on the human element. So how did you choose, what stories are going to be the most powerful or, the best to tell?
That was a very difficult task. And in fact, we spent, 6 months probably brainstorming about all these different stories. And that brainstorming was based on all these notes I had collected, all these ideas I had collected, all these professional papers I had read, and this ever-growing understanding of how all these pieces of the Anthropocene system were fitting together and influencing each other. So we had these floor-to-ceiling whiteboards in my office, and we covered those things with 3x3-inch Post-it notes, collecting all these ideas. And we mixed and mashed them in different ways and filtered and changed and tried different storylines and hired a screenwriter to work with us. And he was on the job for a couple of months, and then he got pulled away by production in Washington, and we lost him. And so, it was a lot of back and forthing and zigging and zagging. And eventually you just get to a point where you go, let's just choose one direction here, because this thing is a gigantic Rubik's Cube. You can go in from any side of the Anthropocene story and you can make a story work. Let's pick this one. And this one was to focus on these classical ancient elements, earth, air, fire, and water, and tell the story through those four elements. That said, there were times when we were well into the production where I was questioning whether we should stay with that or whether perhaps we should really hit hard on the story about fire and stay with fire. But my co-producers on this pushed back and said, no, the element story, the element structure is correct. So that's how it came out. And I think it all came out as it was meant to happen. There's that old line from one of the Kurt Vonnegut novels decades ago. I think it was Slaughterhouse-Five. And he ended his chapters or started his chapters or something with the line of, well, as it was meant to happen, something else happened. Well, that's the story of my life.
And then he would often end it with, so it goes.
And so it goes. That's right.
So it goes.
One of you doesn't sound like you're of my old man generation, but you clearly know the old literature.
I went through a Vonnegut phase in high school. I was working as a lifeguard at a sparsely attended community pool, and so we had a lot of time to read when there was no one in the water that needed watching, and so I got through most of Vonnegut's collection. So,
good for you.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that the fire element of this film had a strong impact on you personally, because the moment in the film, Abe and I were lucky enough to watch an advanced screener. There's a moment where you're getting ready to interview a woman who's been affected by one of the fires in California, and before she can even start talking, her voice kind of breaks, and that was the moment where I about lost it watching the movie. I found that incredibly affecting and heartbreaking, and there's an aspect of, I don't know, maybe voyeurism is the wrong word, but we are watching these people in some of their lowest moments and some of their moments of greatest pain. And how do you, as a storyteller and a photographer, take those moments and amplify them into something that hopefully has a positive impact without feeling gross about it, I guess? Is that a fair question?
Well, that's a sensitive and very intelligent question. And it's certainly something that all of us in this field struggle with, and not just on a project like this. But it's tough to carry the weight of that pain and suffering with them. And that's what you wind up doing. And in fact, just recollecting that is making my own voice crack right now. And I find that is often the case when I talk about some of these storylines. But you thrust yourself into that and you accept your role and your purpose and your mission within that framework, because you realize that there is a service that's being done here. Many, many years ago when I first started photography and I found myself, entering these worlds where I was a stranger and the people didn't know me from a hole in the wall. And in some cases, I was entering places where it was a painful and a difficult story. Another photographer, more senior than I, said, don't forget, the secret sauce here is that everybody wants to have their story told. No matter if it's good, bad, or indifferent, everybody appreciates the opportunity to have someone from outside their world who cares about their world and wants to tell their story. And as it turns out, it's generally the case that the more awful their story is, the more open they are, the more eager they are to have the story told. So, yeah, I mean, I share the heartbreak and I feel squeamish about being involved with it at times, but I think that it does a service to them. It's a monument and a memorial to their situation, and it helps to educate all the rest of us about the reality of what all this stuff means. So I feel like, we're just doing what needs to be done.
Is there an aspect of being a photographer? Is there something that a still image can do that is maybe easier or more difficult to do on film? Like, what's kind of the breakdown in the way you're trying to tell those stories or represent those images?
Yeah, it's that also is a very, very good question. And it's a tricky sort of a surfboard surface to go sliding around on. Sometimes the surfboard takes you towards, man, the still picture is perfect. And then other times you go, damn, the still picture doesn't do anything at all. Only the cinematic narrative helps. And then sometimes you get the cinematic narrative on and you go, it's visually, aesthetically, it doesn't distill it well enough. Oh, yeah, that still picture, that's perfect. So you go back and forth and back and forth. And as it happens, to quote Kurt Vonnegut, as it was meant to happen, it seems that both of the forms augment each other. And that turned out to be more of a surprise in this film than I had anticipated. I knew that you could combine the two media or mediums in the same film, but there's a lot of still pictures in this film, quite uncustomarily so for a moving picture story. I think it's 70 or 80 pictures. And many, many people comment about how effective it is to just stop. You're just right there, just in that space and time, stopped. You don't have the river of 24 frames a second flowing past you. We're asking you to pause and look at this one person or look at this one place. And that's extremely powerful. So if I ever have the stamina again to do another film, there might even be more still pictures in there. Who knows?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I consider myself a very, very amateur level photographer, and I've tried every now and then to...
Jim, you should see the way this guy chases a porcupine through the forest to get the shot. He's amateur as I think he's selling himself a little short here.
I always try to go out of my way to, if there's something in my mind that I think is going to capture what I'm looking at, I go out of my way to figure that out. And I think you have a lot of really incredible footage. And in particular, I'm thinking a lot of the wildfire footage that you capture, not just the video, but the still frames. It's like you mentioned, it's sometimes one of those frames alone can convey such a powerful picture. And then there are other footage where you have the camera right in the midst of everything. And there's one in particular where it seems like your camera is in the middle of the fire. And did you lose a lot of equipment getting these incredible shots? I imagine it wasn't easy.
I think the shot you're referring to is a picture where the point of view is on the ground, looking up through the trunks of the trees.
That's the one.
Yeah, and watching the trees burst into flame. And the shot goes on, watching the flames until all of a sudden so many ashes and burning chunks fall on the camera that you can't see anything anymore. Well, as a matter of fact, we spent 2 years trying to get that shot. And we initially built some fireproof housings that were derived from what the U.S. Forest Service photographer up in, where was it? I forget it. It doesn't matter. From stuff that he was trying to do. And we didn't find that those housings were working very well for our purposes. So we kept going through a series of iterations. And in the end, wound up with a little trick to put a camera on the ground. I'm not going to reveal what that trick was, but we actually burned up, I think, about 5 or 6 cameras before we got to that shot. And I will say that with that shot, the camera came out looking like a roasted brown marshmallow.
Wow.
And it was melted just the same way a marshmallow is when you put it in the flames. But we had learned that the camera may get torched, but if the fire goes past quickly enough, the little memory card inside the camera is protected. So we were gambling on that, and the camera was so deformed that we had to pull the memory card out with needle nose pliers, but we got it out, and incredibly enough, the thing still was working fine. We stuck it in the computer, the picture, and there it was. It was mind-boggling.
Wow.
Wow, that was such a powerful view. And, watching it, one of my first thoughts was, gosh, I hope I never have to see that view, like that perspective in person.
Yeah, for sure. You would probably be dying, literally.
Right.
We're laying there on the forest floor watching that.
So I know I have a couple of photographer friends in my life, and I thought about this maybe a little bit more while watching Chasing Ice, but I guess I just want to know what's wrong with you people? Like what happens to make a photographer these people who are just, will do anything life and limb, quite literally, to go get the shot?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I've been scribbling out a little essay on that very, very subject over the past few days. And there's a lot of layers of personality and passion that go into it. On the plus side, you feel intensely motivated to bear witness to something. And you, for whatever reason, you feel that it's your job to do it. In my particular case, I was the oldest of three sons, and there were only three sons in the family. So I had to be the responsible one. And I think that my parents wagging their fingers at me for all those years going, Jimmy, you have to be responsible and do this to show your brothers the right way. That had something to do with setting up the personality that drives this. But there's a much broader ideology and philosophy and passion of recognizing that the world is in the state of very serious historic monumental change right now. And if somebody doesn't pay attention to it, then it just comes and goes, and the future won't be the wiser, and the bad guys will have won. So I feel that it's my obligation to show up and bear witness. On the dark side, the personality, there's probably a certain amount of obsessive compulsive disorder. you get captured by an idea and it just doesn't let go. And in fact, for literally almost 40 years now, one of the core underlying aspects of my work has been this being captured by this awareness that there's this collision between Homo sapiens and the rest of the natural world. And that was an extremely important and fertile area for me to be investigating.
Yeah, you kind of ended Chasing Ice talking about that, like how would you justify what you do to future generations, and you say, like, well, I was out there doing everything I could. And I think more so than many people who are advocates for the realities of climate change, you really do seem like you're doing everything you can, which is admirable. But taking a step back towards the past, you talk in this film about growing up in the coal country of Pennsylvania, and so you talk about being raised as the oldest of three sons. Do you think there's an irony in the resources that we've exploited for generations to gain the prosperity that we have now, sort of turning against us and making the world a much more fraught and dangerous place than it's ever been?
Yeah, there's a tremendous irony. And that's sort of an essential irony of the Anthropocene. And it's an essential irony of modern environmentalism. I think we all have to recognize that we've had a role in the destruction of the world as we've known it. And the previous sort of attitude of most aware environmentalists or scientists or people of whatever stripe who are aware of these issues, the attitude has been, well, it's them. It's those other people over there who are doing the destruction, and always pointing the finger somewhere else. The fact of the matter is we are all in this together. We've all benefited from the use of these fossil fuels. And I think unless we actually look at ourselves in the mirror and acknowledge that, we will not effectively move past those fossil fuels. I think we need to own this, and then we can move past it on a more reasonable, ethically intact, emotionally correct basis. So, that's why we brought that coal mining story down to such a personal level. That's my own personal rendition of this broader story I just mentioned. My grandparents on both sides were coal miners. My father's father was killed in a coal mine collapse in western Pennsylvania. And yet, we need to move past what he did. He was doing the best he could with the tools he had. The people of that time, the society of that time, were doing the best they could with the knowledge they had, the tools they had, the needs they had, the opportunities they had. And our job right now is to do exactly the same thing with our knowledge of today, with our tools, with our opportunities. It doesn't have to be the same path that they took in the past.
It's something that struck me with a few of the people you interviewed or profiled in this film is more than once a person, in speaking about their own lived-in experience, almost turns straight to the camera and says, like, unless you've lived it, you can't know what it's like. But they're all talking about the collapse of their own regional economies or the loss of a way of life that's very important to them. And it struck me how, like, each story you were telling of these four different elements shared that in common. And I wonder if there's hopefully a growing awareness, especially because of films like this, that, like, maybe I don't understand exactly what it's like to be living on an island in the Chesapeake, but if I feel that same feeling about coming from coal country, I grew up in West Virginia, like, there is that shared experience, even if I don't know exactly what they felt. And I don't know, I got a sense of, like, there was almost like a poetry there in the way that the stories kind of rhymed with each other. Was that intentional?
Yeah, that was absolutely on purpose. When we started out, we didn't know that we would quite wind up with such resonance. And we didn't know that we would wind up with stories that were all basically constructed around people of modest means, for the most part, kind of living their lives. But once we got into it, we realized, all these stories speak to each other, and the subjects are speaking to each other, and there is indeed a shared experience. And speaking of shared experiences, I was at a dinner about a year and a half ago with some very influential people in the environmental world and the filmmaking world. And we went around the table and told each other what we had been working on. And I had just come back from shooting that coal segment in Pennsylvania. So I talked about that a little bit. And half of the people in there said, oh, you know what? I have mining in my history too. My grandfather was a coal miner. My great-grandfather was a tin miner in Cornwall, England. And they went around the table. So many people had coal mining, or mining. So anyway, the point is, there's a shared experience, and it helps to acknowledge that we're all part of this.
Right, and it's everywhere an intertwined story, and hearing theirs, maybe it's not what we've experienced, but at some point, we're all going to be responsible for the same things, right? There's a quote that you kind of wrap up the documentary with towards the end that said, truth and evidence matter more now than ever. And I think it's a powerful quote, but it also makes me think about some of the experiences I've had in trying to communicate a lot of this, in a lot of my own personal work and everything else in life. And I don't know if you've had a whole lot of interactions or you've met many people who, despite being presented all the evidence, they still reject that. And they're still critical of, what the climate science is telling us. And have you found, maybe a human-centered approach that is more effective in having a productive communication or, conversations with people like that?
It occurs to me that the problem is just like the problem that we face when we're climbing a lot of mountains or technical climbs. You throw yourself at an objective and you reach a rock wall that seems impervious and impassable. And you throw yourself at it, and eventually you have two choices. One is you keep throwing yourself at it and frustrating yourself and beating yourself up. Or you say, oh, why don't we go back down a little bit, and why don't we look for another way? And I think that's where we are with a lot of our fellow Americans. Some of the fellow Americans are that rock wall. that will never change and will be impassive because of their belief systems. And they're impervious to evidence. And they're impervious to the truth of what evidence and science has come to understand. And after a certain point, you have to say, gosh, I'm sorry, but I'm going to talk to a different group of people. Let's have a more productive conversation. That said, I've had a lot of people come up to me after these screenings or after a lecture and say, everything I knew came from Sean Hannity. And this story that you've told me, nobody told me that before. I never understood that before. So now I get it in a way I never had it before. So thank you for showing me. I've had people who worked in the oil industry who have come to me and said that.
But do you ever... I found myself getting angry at points in this film because of the callousness with which these problems have been foisted on these communities. And so, like, do you find yourself getting angry, or was anger an emotion you were trying to generate in the audience, or where, what role there's being dispassionate and finding the route up the mountain that will serve us best, but at what point does the dispassion maybe is a disservice and we need to get up in arms, I guess?
Yeah, well, it's kind of the question of the moment, isn't it? It's been the question of the past years. I oscillate all the time, whether it's during the making of the film or now, between being passionate and being angry, between being understanding and conciliatory, and just being furious that people are being so dense. And I think that's a big deal, and it's really problematic. And I don't know that there is any perfect answer to the issue. This response to climate change and response to the Anthropocene is, in fact, if you understand the issue, something that elicits a whole bunch of emotional reactions simultaneously. It can make you angry. It can make you want to be thoughtful and compassionate with some of your fellow inhabitants of the earth and say, tell me about your story. Let me try and understand this with you. It can make you despairing. It can make you depressed. It can make you hopeful when you see about the good things that some people are doing on some frontiers. So opposite emotions, opposite ideas are constantly seesawing back and forth. And it's a very difficult place to be. I struggle with this practically every day of my life. The only time I ever get away from it is if I just kind of lock the door, throw away the key and say, I'm going on a river trip out in the canyons of Utah, and I'm not listening to any of this stuff. I'm not thinking about any of this stuff for a week. Don't bother me. Adios. But as soon as I come back in this civilized, developed world, and I'm dealing with this stuff, and I'm reading articles, and I'm seeing this latest story right now about how the oceans are absorbing all this extra warming. I think it was in Science last week. It's like, it's hard not to be depressed and angry and frustrated. And it's not just because of the film. Yet, as I say, that's the world we live in. I don't think we have much of a choice right now.
Yeah. So for my own therapeutic reasons, I'm going to ask, do you have hope?
I sometimes have hope, and I sometimes have despair. But I was driving past the most beautiful part of the Rocky Mountains last May, going to a film festival in Telluride. And it flashed through my head that, there's this a line in psychology where depression is anger turned inward. And some depression is anger turned inward. But I think action can be anger turned outward. Depression is taking that anger at the outer world that's not responding to the truth as all our numbers and our graphs and our computer models comprehended. It's taking the anger at that and turning it inward and going, damn, that bumps me out. I can't tolerate that. And you get more and more despairing and more depressed. But if you kind of grab that anger with two hands and that depression with two hands and say, I'm not going to hold that inside myself. I'm going to rip it out of my solar plexus and put it out there in the world in the form of action. that takes it out from being a self-lacerating place to being a place where maybe there's something good that can come out of it. And that's what I've been trying to do.
It's a really good way to think about it. And James, we have one more question I wanted to ask. What was it like screening a documentary like this at, the largest scientific conference full of geoscientists? It
was exciting and it was intimidating. I got asked to do that presentation way back in the spring, and I thought about it ever since that day I got the invitation. And I spent an enormous amount of time thinking about how I would tell the story. And the story that I told at AGU was certainly based on what I've been doing the past 10 years, but it was a much bigger, much broader, much deeper, much more photographically complex story. And so we had to rehearse it for about 2 weeks. I've never rehearsed a presentation at anything like that level of detail before, and got it nailed into the position that it's in. So I was pretty wound up about 2 weeks out and about 1 week out because the rehearsals were not going very well. And then all of a sudden I found a bit more of the right techniques for handling the notes, handling the ideas. And I started to feel like I had distilled and cooked down what I wanted to say into its essential elements, in fact. So by the time I got on that stage, I felt like, yeah, I got this, man. I'm on this, and I can't wait to tell this story.
Awesome.
Well, it's a really fantastic story, and I encourage all of our listeners to find a screening near them. If people are interested in checking out the film, which, as I said, premieres in North America on January 29th, what are their options, Jim? Where can they go find a screening near them?
Well, I think the important thing to point out is if you want to see the film, the online digital premiere will be on January 29th, and it will go on continuously after that. It will be available on iTunes, Amazon, Google Play, Vudu, Xbox, PlayStation, Fandango Now, and Redbox. So all those different sites will carry it, and we encourage you to use it and to see it. And the other thing I would like to mention is that we are providing the film pro bono to science teachers all across the English-speaking world. This is a campaign that will be released in April at the National Science Teachers Association Annual Convention. That's primarily, of course, middle school and high school science teachers. We're preparing a study guide to go with it, and we want the film to be available to science teachers to help reveal these stories to their students. We have cut the film into its constituent parts, so you can just look at the part of the film that's about the air supply, or the part of the film that's about fire or sea level or whatever it is. So we've cut it apart so it can be used in a classroom context. And we really, really, really want to see science teachers use that to support a change in the understanding of their students.
That is awesome. I'm very glad you brought that up because I was not aware of that. And we will link in the show notes to this episode to the humanelementmovie.com, which is the website for the film, which has links to the social media presence for the film. And then you yourself have a website, jamesbalog.com, and as a photographer are also pretty active on Instagram if you want to go follow you along there. So is there anything else you want people to know about the film or about your work before we let you go?
No. The big thing really is to make sure that everybody has all those hyperlinks. Keep jamesbalog.com. Well, I guess that's all right. That's fine. I just don't want more emails in my life.
Fair enough. No, okay, that sounds great. I will include the links to the film specifically. And thank you so much for some of your time. I really enjoyed the film, and I hope people out there go and check it out. And yeah, thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, same here. I thought it was a fantastic film.
My pleasure. Well, this has been a great interview, and I will actually refer to this interview when I'm writing the essays for my new book.
Oh, that's
wonderful.
Lovely. Thank you so much. And we will email CC a link to the episode when it comes out.
Sounds good. Thanks so
awesome.
much.
All right,
Thank
thanks.
you, James.
Have a great rest of the day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks again to James and Cece, his publicist, for arranging that chance to talk. It was a really fun conversation. And
yeah, and as he mentioned, the humanelementmovie.com. Go and check it out. It really is a really awesome documentary. And if you haven't watched Chasing Ice, also go in and watch that.
Yeah. But much like increasing atmospheric carbon dioxide will cause carbon dioxide to dissolve into the Earth's ocean, opening a beer or carbonated beverage causes carbon dioxide to dissolve out.
Oh, no.
We're going to talk about that next in our next segment. What are we drinking?
Last train leaving the station, and I'm gonna take it. Before I'm broken more by the situation, I am gonna break it. Lord, no, I tried more than any man could, and I did more than I swore I ever would. Now I'm turning the good into gone, and I'm shuffling on my way. You better believe it. You better believe it. A ray of light found its way to my mind, knots untied. You better believe it.
Are we increasing Earth's CO2?
I mean, it's all eventually in equilibrium. This
The
was
more beers we drink.
But this was force injected. This didn't passively diffuse.
Oh, that's fair.
All right, so it would not be an episode of Science Sort of if we didn't also talk about what we are drinking. You heard Joe open a can. Is it of what? I don't know. We'll have to ask him. Joe, what are you drinking?
Well, so Ben hasn't been on the show in a while.
He sure hasn't.
I don't think. So I was at my local...
he moved homes, everyone wondering why they haven't heard from Ben, and he has yet to set up his podcasting equipment, and I've been shaming him as much as I can. I feel like the Canadian capacity to be shamed by an American is lower than I would give to another American, so I can be a little careful. But hopefully we will get Ben back on the show soon. We've got lots for him to talk about. But are you stepping up your weird beverage game in Ben's absence?
Yeah. I mean, I'll start by saying I feel like all it takes to set up a podcasting equipment is plugging a USB plug in, but I digress. So, I've stopped by my my local poke store today for lunch, and I picked up a weird Japanese beverage.
Hey.
The only thing I can read on it is Choya, Choya, is the brand. It is a yuzu juice drink of some sort.
It's probably going to be sour.
Well, it's got pictures of what I thought were lemons, but it's calling yuzu fruit. Maybe.
Yes, yuzu is a specific Japanese citrus.
Aha. Well, that is what I am about to drink, so we'll give it a whirl. It's pretty tasty. It's like a lemonade type beverage.
So it is tart.
It is tart, for sure. Yeah. It's a little bit more tart than a typical soda might be, although it does have 31 grams of sugar, so there's plenty of sugar in here. But it's good.
Something I've been trying to point out when people on the show have something that is a non-alcoholic beverage, I can usually find those on Amazon, and if I can, then I post a link in the show notes. And the links to Amazon in the show notes are always affiliate links, which means if you go and buy this yuzu drink from Amazon, we will get a little bit of the cut. And I mean, I don't want to have citrus juice put on a cut, but it's a cut out of Jeff Bezos' pockets, and so I think most people can get on board with that. So, Joe, your mission before I post this episode is to find me a link so I can let the good people go and get it for themselves.
All right. I found a link to the manufacturer website so I could learn what I was drinking, but I'll look on Amazon.
Excellent. We're waiting with bated breath. Abe, you want to tell everyone what we're having?
Yeah. So, Ryan and I were driving with Julie as well earlier today through Maryland, and we stopped in Frederick, Maryland, for a bite to eat, and we picked up something that was local, which we try to do pretty much everywhere we go. We always try to find the nearest watering spot, and so we are drinking a pale ale by Attaboy Brewing Company out of Frederick, Maryland, and this particular pale ale is called Creek Life, and in parentheses Denali, because it's using Denali hops.
Okay, I was wondering about that. I didn't know.
Yeah, so they have variants of their Creek Life pale ale, and I am assuming that all of their variants are single hop variants, and so they have a Creek Life Citra, Creek Life Denali, for each of their hop varietals that they make a pale ale with this particular recipe, they'll just add that in parentheses to differentiate between them.
And we didn't go to the brewery because we needed some food.
Right.
And it seems like, I don't know if it's a law in Maryland that they can't serve food at breweries, but it seems like most of the breweries I've been to in that area don't have food as well. So I don't know what's going on there, Maryland, but we ended up at a restaurant that had crowler fills. Have you seen these crowler things, Joe?
No, I have not.
Do you even know the word I'm saying right now? Is it even
Nope.
registering
I know the word
in your vocabulary?
growler. I don't know the word
Yes.
growler.
So this is crowler. It's a growler if it was a can.
Oh, okay.
So they have like, how big are the cans? They're
Usually 32 ounces.
so it's like
a half growler.
It's a half growler sized aluminum can
It's a large can.
that they fill right there from the tap line, and then they actually put a lid on top, and then they have the machine that folds the aluminum lip over the cylindrical part of the can, and it folds it over the lid part of the can, and so it forms like an actual seal with the pull tab sealed. So you have a completely sealed can of beer that just came straight off the tap line.
From draft. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
It actually is pretty cool.
Yeah, and they actually preserve fairly well.
Yeah, because with growlers, there's some growler systems that have like advanced ways for removing any headspace or oxygen from the very, very tippy top of the growler. But even then, the second you open the growler, you're still going to lose some of that freshness, and it's just harder to maintain. Whereas with these crowlers, like a can has a much longer shelf life, especially because the way they do it, they're absolutely removing all the oxygen from the can, so you get a really nice product. What do you think of the beer, Abe?
I think it's not bad.
It's lighter. I mean, it's a pale ale.
Significantly lighter. I haven't had, it just dawned on me, I haven't had a pale ale in a long time.
And I don't know that I've ever had anything that was a single hop Denali hop.
Same for me.
It's fruitier.
Yeah. Less on the piney,
Definitely not
like the traditional piney aromas that I'm familiar with. Pale ales like Sierra Nevada or IPAs. That's just not there.
It's fruitier and richer than those. Mm-hmm. It's nice.
Yeah. I'm excited to see if I can find more from Attaboy, because I'd never heard of them until we found them in our search for food.
Yes. Well, in our search to humanize science, we have made a new friend. Abe and I did a podcasting workshop at AGU, and we're going to talk just very briefly about that workshop in our next segment. We're also going to feature a short interview that I did with our co-host of the workshop, Jackson Watkins. So that's coming up next. So I have a bad habit of overbooking myself. Abe and I have talked about the tendency to overbook oneself at conferences and conventions. And this AGU was particularly tough because I was there as press. It was in our hometown of DC. I was involved in an Association for Women Geoscientists event. And I was performing at an event for Story Collider, which is a podcast some of you might have heard of. But I don't think my story is going to be on the podcast. I was just performing at a live show.
Like juggling or something? What do you mean? No story?
I was doing a live storytelling event, but the Story Collider folks also put out a podcast of those live stories, like The Moth, but for science stories. Mm-hmm. But they don't do, because there's a bunch of different Story Colliders all around the country, not every story that gets told live in front of an audience gets featured on the podcast. So,
and I was really hoping there'd be like fire juggling, but there wasn't.
Yeah.
Yes.
But the stories are pretty amazing, though. So I think Ryan did a fantastic job.
That's good.
And I want to shout out to Max and Aaron, who actually came to the Story Collider show as fans of the podcast. They heard about me doing it on the show and wanted to come and support me. And that was really awesome. So Max and Aaron, it was great to meet you. And thank you so much for coming out to the show.
Yeah. And I echo that because I also got to meet them. So
yes, Abe was at the show.
Fantastic.
Abe was not performing, but Abe was there to support me and my nervousness, and another friend who was also performing. So it was a good group, good room. We did it at the Carnegie Institute, which is like this church to science. It's a pretty amazing space.
It was actually.
It was really cool. But in addition to all those things, I saw that the AGU Sharing Science Twitter account tweeted out all of their Sharing Science events, and Sharing Science is a branded term that AGU has. It's all about helping scientists learn to do outreach better. And I clicked through because I knew my Story Collider event was going to be one of those, but I couldn't remember exactly what day it was. I want to make sure I have everything on my calendar in the right spot. And so I'm scrolling down and I saw that they had podcasting 101. And I was like, oh, that's I'm kind of bummed. They know, AGU folks know that I do podcasting stuff. I've done webinars for them before, and kind of sad they didn't ask me to help out with that. And then I clicked the expand down, and they're like, join Science Sort of host Ryan Hus and Humanizing Science host Jackson Watkins as they demystify the art of podcasting. And I'm like, so either I agreed to this and forgot, or they just assumed and they're right. So I'm not sure exactly what it was. But before the event, I met up with Jackson and we had a brief chat just to sort of about our philosophies of doing a podcast. And one of the things I like to do when I run these workshops is I like to have a little bit of audio to demonstrate some of the techniques that we're going to be teaching as part of the workshop. So I said, hey, Jackson, let's also just record some of what we're talking about. So this is a short snippet from sort of how he and I both feel about science podcasting that I thought was worth including in the show here. So give it a listen. So this is Ryan Haupt.
This is Jackson Watkins.
And we've never met before, but we are fellow science podcasters. And Jackson, tell me about your show.
Okay, so my show is a show called Humanizing Science. The idea is to bring in scientists and have them tell stories not only about their science, but other things that they do outside of it. And I think the idea there is to show that not only that a person's lifestyle can be multidimensional, but also that a scientist's lifestyle can be multidimensional, which I think is beneficial for improving our connection to the public. What about your podcast?
It's actually pretty similar. It's science, sort of, and our whole thing is we want to talk about things that are science, things that are sort of science, and things that wish they were science. And we tend to think of ourselves as sort of science's late-night chat show. People will roll their eyes when they hear this, but I would love it if the guests of our show thought of themselves not as a scientist giving an interview, but a celebrity guest on Conan O'Brien talking on the couch about their latest project. And we sort of want it to be more like what a conversation between scientists sounds like at a happy hour, not at the professional part of a professional conference. So
yeah, cool. So less professional than you would expect it, even some of these talks here.
Yeah, I mean, we want the information to be good, but we want to break it down in such a way where even if you're using jargon, we always define what the jargon is, or if there's a lot of wait, back up, or there's a lot of we make that an analogy so that it's a little more clear to the listening public. And I think, our audience still tends towards the educated and technically minded people, but we hopefully can take, what kind of science do you do primarily?
I do microbiology. Yeah.
So we are both people who do a type of biology. I'm doing vertebrate paleontology, which is, the intersection of biology and geology. You're doing microbiology.
Yeah, infectious disease.
We could technically be in the same department, but it would be very difficult for us to have a conversation about what we do without breaking down the jargon that we both have gotten used to in our sub-discipline. So sort of the idea behind our show is even amongst other scientists, if somebody doesn't break down what they do in a more relatable way, you can be lost hearing about a discipline of science that just isn't your own.
Yeah, so something I've been thinking about, I guess, and I've brought up on the show, actually, is whether or not it's scientists' job to make their work more accessible like that.
Huh. So is there a reason why we wouldn't want our work to be more accessible?
I think sometimes there's an attitude that we shouldn't dumb it down, or people should try to go out of their way to access what we're doing, which I think is a little bit silly because we don't expect other professions to do that for us necessarily.
And we also, most science is funded by the taxpayer at a certain level, NSF, at least here in the U.S. And so, is there not a social obligation to justify the money being spent on what we do by explaining it to the people who are paying for it?
Yeah, exactly. And you'll read a grant, and even reading a grant, it's not super accessible. So people, I don't think, know what they're paying for. And you're right about the jargon. Jargon's a huge thing. It's just so hyper-specific. And honestly, we sometimes, even though we're not thinking about it, we get like bogged down by it. Just because we're so used to it in our everyday lives. But
did you check out the Upgoer 5 session here? Okay, I gave a talk in
that. I didn't get yours. I think I was at the one afterwards.
Mine was the very last one. So there was a morning session and an afternoon session.
Okay. Oh, then I totally saw you there yesterday and didn't even realize it.
Mine was the process of fossilization.
Yeah, you went kind of towards the end, right?
Yeah.
Of that session. Yeah, I was totally there.
I had all the GIFs. I had all the animated GIFs in my talk.
Yeah. That makes so much sense. I think the one that stood out was I can't remember her name, but she did a presentation and she was really, really utilizing like and because those words are allowed in the top like 1,000.
That was the poem one, one that was in like rhyming in verse. Yeah, no, they picked a really strong one to start off the session with.
I felt bad because everybody else did a great job.
That was a hard act to follow because that was so good. So what kind of scientists have you featured on your show, and like what makes them human?
So I guess I had a scientist who was also a microbiologist in our department. Her name's Stephanie, and she does circus artistry on the side. So she got her PhD, she finished up her degree, and then she went straight into the circus. And she joined the circus, and she did hair hanging with them and traveled around the U.S. for a little bit.
She literally ran off and joined the circus.
Yeah, right after getting her PhD. It was awesome.
Dr. Circus, that's amazing.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit. Our school, CSU, had an incident last spring involving some Native American students that were potential students, I guess. They were coming for recruiting.
Okay.
And they were discriminated against on campus, and she's Native American, and she does a lot of outreach with Native American students, and she was just talking about like kind of how mad she was, but also like how she thought the best way to address issues like that were, and that was really interesting. And then she actually didn't talk that much about her science because the conversation didn't necessarily go that way, but it was really exciting anyway.
But it sounds like that's part of what your show is about, is like taking a scientist but giving them the chance to talk about their other passions.
Yeah, I think that's the idea, right? Because
that's really cool.
Yeah.
And at what point do you interview yourself?
I was actually asked this by my mom, of all people. She's like, I want to hear about your stuff. And I was like...
My mom is also one of our biggest fans for my podcast. So I think moms are just into podcasting.
I know, it's awesome. And my grandma, I don't know. But yeah, who are some interesting guests you've had on your show?
One of the things I really like about our show is that we will occasionally go try to get the big gets, the whales. Actually, we just had a whale scientist on, so that's kind of funny. But
no pun intended.
Right. But I think... What's really cool is that we're the kind of show where somebody who's doing big stuff or has like books coming out. So we had like Carl Zimmer, Mary Roach, we had Andy Ware who wrote The Martian. So like we had these big profile guests, but then we also want to talk to grad students who maybe have never given an interview before and nobody's ever asked them about their work. But we know that grad students are basically on the front lines of where all the science happens. So we want it to be as level a playing field as possible for people of different levels of their career, different levels of science that's considered sexy. We have this weird... I just interviewed 2 sedimentologists who I've been pursuing one of them for many years because we were in the same department, and he would always tell me, like, what I do is not interesting. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't think that. Like, you're being disingenuous when you tell me that you're not into what you do, so why wouldn't you, like, share that with the people? I'm telling you they will be interested if you sound interested in it. So... Has that been your experience as well, or?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think a lot of, especially microbiologists, not necessarily the people I've interviewed, but a lot of microbiologists are kind of wary towards sharing their stuff. And I'm not here to like make generalizations about people in my field. But
do you think that's just because like there's a health component to what microbiologists do?
It's partially that. There's also a lot of like public outcry towards some of the work we do. Like
you're playing God.
Playing God for sure. CRISPR-Cas, you hear that a lot.
I don't know who that is. Is he a microbiologist?
Oh, CRISPR-Cas is like a technology that we use to like insert.
CRISPR.
Yeah, sorry, I was probably like slurring, but.
Well, I thought you were talking about some guy named Christopher Cass, and I was like, what did he do?
That's actually, that'd make a great children's book, like Christopher Cass.
The Adventures of Christopher Cass.
And we could explain CRISPR, an idea for another time, but yeah, that.
I'll delete this.
Yeah, don't tell anybody. That and vaccines. Vaccines are one recently, actually, because there's a lot of vaccine work. Testing vaccine candidates is one of the biggest goals of a lot of microbiology.
Because as we all know, vaccines are incredibly unsafe and should never be administered under any circumstances.
I'm not going to get down this path, but there's a lot of negative publicity towards this stuff. So I think sometimes people get afraid, and I'm sure climate scientists, there's a lot of climate scientists here, so they can probably understand that feeling, especially like when your science becomes politicized. sometimes you get too frustrated or sometimes you get flustered when people bring it up. So,
well, it's complicated. We spend years figuring out our part of the research. And then so when somebody comes in with an argument against vaccines that's like completely disproven and so dumb that it's not even worth addressing, it can be very difficult to be like, what I know about this is so far advanced, not in like I'm better than you, but it's just like my thinking about this is really technical and complicated because I've been trained for years, and it can be really hard for me to back that up back down to where I need to tell you that it's not going to cause autism.
Yeah, because like the binary that you're arguing against is way different too, because like in the public eye, they're arguing, I shouldn't say we're part of the public, but in the public discourse, they're talking about whether or not climate change is happening. And we haven't been having that kind of discourse in climate science, for a super long time. So the discussions are just different. We're asking different questions and we're considering different things. So.
I really like the way you phrased that, where you caught yourself and said, like, well, scientists are part of the public too, because a lot of times the criticism isn't about the actual thing we're saying. It's the fact that we're saying anything at all. And we get told like, oh, you can't possibly be trusted because you have an agenda as a scientist. And like, while that's true, my agenda is to promote the work that I do. I also have an agenda as a citizen, and I don't think it's fair to be told that my agenda as a citizen doesn't count because of the type of job that I have. Like, maybe there are types of jobs where that's a relevant critique, but like we see this with celebrities all the time too. Like, if a celebrity says something you don't agree with, they get told like, oh, shut up, you're just a celebrity. It's like, no, they're also a citizen. They also get to have they get to go vote on voting day, same as we do. So
I think that's just like one of those ad hominem attacks that people use when they they
try to poison the well.
Actual things to say. But, at the same time, those are the people you need to connect to the most, which is frustrating in some ways, but I think it's really exciting when you can find other ways to relate to people besides science, and then the science can come
and
up.
I think that brings it right back around to your podcast.
Yeah, and yours.
Yeah. So,
and all of these science podcasts are trying to make things accessible. So.
And it's cool that we get to like come together at big meetings like AGU. And I mean, the point of these meetings, like this meeting is ostensibly about geophysics. It's the American Geophysical Union, but it also becomes a place where a vertebrate paleontologist and a microbiologist can come together and talk about podcasting and science outreach.
Yeah. And there's just like so much, I don't know. I think it's a beautiful thing. It's really cool to be here for the first time and like experience that firsthand, because I don't know. That's what it's all about. So,
and I think with that, we probably got more than enough for our podcasting workshop that we're doing tomorrow. So not only are we fellow podcasters, we're soon to be first-time collaborators on this weird workshop that we're putting together for AGU. So I think, thanks for chatting with me.
Yeah, thank you as well.
All right, thanks again to Jackson for chatting with me and for helping us do the workshop. But because of some last-minute things that came up, Abe actually ended up helping out with the workshop too, which you weren't exactly expecting. But how did it go? How did it feel?
It was great. Yeah, it was. I was going to be there for exactly one day, which is what I managed to get time off of work to attend a whole day at AGU as press, and I was really excited about that. And it just happened to be that the day that Ryan needed help with the workshop was an easy day for me to take off of work and go spend my whole day at AGU. And it was actually really fun to just be able to share, my experience coming onto Science Sort of, and I think
and some of the technical aspects
and the
too.
technical aspects, and I think
you brought your mic and stuff. You brought your gear,
yeah, exactly, and
we all have different gear at this point, so it's like my gear is different than Abe's gear is different than probably Joe's gear, and so
and I sympathize with the audience that was there to try to learn about podcasting, because I was there at some point. I was a guest on the show with Ryan early in our masters, and at the time when he talked about doing a podcast, in my head, it was always like, oh man, I don't have any kind of equipment for that. Right. So having gone through that same thought process of, it's not that difficult. You just got to be committed, and you got to know a few technical tricks that will change everything. And so it was nice to be able to share that experience and hopefully encourage some of those attendees to try it out. I think, we heard some of the ideas that they had for starting new podcasts on
or shows they'd already started.
That they started, so I'm excited. Hopefully we get to see some of those come to fruition.
Yeah. And so if what Jackson was talking about on his podcast sounds good, I will link to his podcast feed, which is available on Bandcamp for those who want to check it out. It sounds like a pretty good product, and it sounds like he's coming at it from a distinct but complementary view to what we do here on Science Sort of. So plug for Jackson. With that, if you, as a listener, end up starting your own podcast, maybe you'll tell us about it, and maybe we'll tell everyone else about it when we do our final segment of the show, which is the PaleoPOW.
Pow, pow, pow.
I am just a man in a city, city in a state, state in a country, country in a world, part of a system, driving through the city, stereo is on, people going everywhere, people getting nowhere, with the will to carry on. We think therefore we are a bit confused, promises we make, we break to keep ourselves amused. Everybody sometimes feels like somebody's watching you, and it keeps us human. And it keeps us human.
PaleoPOW is the section of the show.
That's correct. You got it, Abe. I thought you were going to keep going.
Oh,
PaleoPOW is the section of the show where we deal with feedback from the listeners. This is usually where I don't always say it exactly the same way, but I do say the PaleoPOW is the segment of the show.
And that's the part I remember, because you always say that in that way.
It's weird how you say where we deal with feedback from the listeners, like it's this chore.
You know,
like,
it's not a chore, it's a
PaleoPOW
delight. How should I
time.
rephrase it, Joe?
Stupid
Let's workshop
listeners.
this right
Where we
now.
feature.
Sending
Where we
us
feature.
Yeah.
Feature. We've workshopped it, Joe, where we feature feedback from the listeners. Is that better for you?
I'll have to see how it polls.
Okay, put out some polling data for me.
we'll
Put out some polls in the field.
Yeah.
We'll see what the Scottish
El
team say.
PaleoPOW es la sección de este show.
All right, well, Joe, you are starting us off.
Dope. All right, so
Wow, California's really gotten you, man.
Yeah.
heck yeah, man. All right, so I've got a letter from listener Tommy M, who writes in, "Hey guys, I've been a freeloader for too long, but I'm finally changing my ways. Your show has kept me entertained for endless hours while performing the sometimes monotonous work of a vegetation science technician, and it has also rekindled my excitement about learning and pursuing a higher level of excellence in the scientific field, while having fun, of course. I finally set up a Patreon account, and you should hopefully be receiving the cash monies soon. So thanks again, keep up the great work, and take solace that you've at least partially inspired me to return to school and become yet another broke/overworked grad student. Sincerely, Tommy." Well, hey, thanks, Tommy.
I don't know that that's super inspirational.
Well, you know, he's supporting us, so that's great. And he's going back to school to learn some more stuff. And I can appreciate his cynicism because, you know, sometimes that's what you need to get by.
So the thing is, we've learned that he's a vegetation science technician previously, but we don't know if the grad school he's going to is also for vegetation science.
That is true.
So do we assume that he's sticking with the vegetable science? In which case,
Yes.
with this, the theme of this show being like
Fire.
humans and science, is his thesis have something to do with the upcoming plant-human war that is sure to start when plants need to retake their dominance of the globe to prevent us from destroying it all?
Maybe.
I like that.
I also was going to work in somehow the fact that he's a reformed freeloader. I don't know if there's some sort of
are
like...
plants
are
the
reformed.
ultimate freeloaders?
Yeah, they kind of are.
I like the way that's the same thought. I was going to try to work in the 4 elements into how plants freeload off of those.
How about freeloading from the carbon buffet?
Fire, water, air, earth.
Something...
Plants.
What about
Forfecta. Is
something
that a
like
thing?
couch surfing?
Start a new phrase.
Couch surfing, the
Couch
carbon
surfing.
buffet, freeloading in the plant world. Freeloading in the plant world. I like that.
Freeloading in the plant world. That sounds awesome.
Freeloading in the plant world, something sciencey.
I like the carbon buffet. I think if we can incorporate that into a sciencey statement, where's the carbon coming from?
How vegetation threatens to overtake the planet by overfeeding on the carbon buffet? Doesn't sound very thesis. It sounds like this thesis is like
A pop science article.
almost a science fiction. Yeah. So maybe
How about the role of Vegetation.
Because Abe and I are recording with a somewhat different setup. You might hear me actually like scribbling and scratching with pen and paper instead of tippity-tappity typing like I normally.
I'm doing the same thing, scratching it down on a piece of paper.
Freeloading in the plant world.
Role of vegetation on the depletion of our planet's carbon buffet.
Or just dial up the science, right? Like carbon capture, carbon recapture, carbon capture and sequestration via not sequestration. Yeah. No. What's the word I'm looking for?
Do we want to?
Yeah, sequestration.
Yeah, that's right.
Do we want to? Yeah. Do we want to roll in something on the human effect?
That's what I'm trying to think of right now.
So counteracting climate change, the role of vegetation in counteracting
human
increased carbon emissions through enhanced sequestration.
How about like something about human generated carbon?
Anthropomorphic carbon.
Yeah. Anthropogenic carbon.
Anthropogenic.
Anthropomorphic would be human shaped.
Human shaped, that's right. I thought about that. I was like, wait a minute. Anthropogenic.
Reducing anthropogenic carbon via plant-based. Oh, you already said plant. Via vegetation carbon.
Vegetative
capture.
sequestration.
Reducing. Is vegetative an actual word for plant-based? That doesn't sound right.
I have an idea. So
Ryan is scribbling a lot.
Scribbling furiously?
Furiously. This is a whole paragraph, so you know it's a serious thesis.
Yeah.
Freeloading in the plant world, anthropogenic carbon surplus pushes vegetation to the extremes, ... Are we heading from Anthropocene to a new Plantacene?
I like it.
I like it. I like it a lot.
Question mark.
Send it.
I don't know if the ... Dot's necessary, but I feel like it gives it a special BSSO flair.
It does, yeah.
For sure.
All right, Tommy. Whew.
Congrats on that.
Nicely done, Tommy.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Good work.
Thesis.
Are we heading... I want to know the answer to that question, Tommy.
Yeah.
Please write back in and let us know. Are we actually threatening... is there so much carbon dioxide, which we know is what the plants are breathing in? Are the plants going to take back over the world and reintroduce a new age of plants? The people want to know.
Am I going to have to worry about those pipe plants from Mario?
whatever it is you're about to say.
The answer is yes.
Plantacene.
Yeah.
I was thinking vegetable scene. But that does
The
not sound
vegetation?
as cool. The vegetation. That does not sound as cool as Plantacene.
The vegetation sounds like a terrible club in Australia.
Well, I also
Like,
thought about
where they-
Vegetation, but then
I was thinking like
Dragon Ball Z
Vegemite.
people might be too. Oh, or that.
That's why I was thinking like yeah.
The attack of the killer tomatoes.
Yeah, it could happen.
All right, well, Tommy, thank you so much for supporting the show on Patreon. We hope you're happy with your thesis. We have yet to have anyone dispute their thesis, to put their thesis back to the committee.
That's right.
I suppose that's an option if you really hated your thesis. Although he's a vegetative technician, he knows. He knows what's up.
Yeah, he's got the answer.
Yeah. All right, we're going to have Abe go next, I think.
Yeah, so we got an email from Robert.
I gave this email to Abe because he's always speaking in Icelandic, so I'm like, here, take the tough to pronounce one.
And so in a previous episode, we struggled with this particular name. So Robert wrote in to help guide us in how to do it properly. So Robert says, "Hi, PaleoPOWs. Today I listened to episode 228, where you struggled with the pronunciation of my surname. Parenthesis, assuming it was me and there is no other Robert Esch from the Czech Republic who is also donating your podcast. Close parentheses. You say in your show notes that you're not sure if you want to know, but I think you want." I think he's onto us.
We're going to have to keep reading to find out.
So the letter S, which I guess to describe it, is the S with like a little hat on top.
Upside down carrot.
Upside down carrot. Yeah. Robert says the letter S is read sh as in sheep or Skoda.
I thought Skoda was just pronounced Skoda.
Yeah, me too.
Isn't that a car brand?
It is a car brand, and I've always said Skoda, and I feel like everybody says Skoda, and now I feel dumb.
So now you know it's a Czech car brand.
Is it?
It is a Czech car brand. It is.
It is, yeah. So what we've just learned is that it should be Skoda.
I can only hear Clarkson saying it. La Skoda.
And so then Robert also says the little wedge is called hashek. More weird symbols. Do you like it? The acute accent means that the vowel is long. So hashek, the A on hashek is it's got an accent.
Just like you would see in Spanish.
In Spanish, yeah. And the C also has an upside down caret. Is that what you called it? Yeah. Yeah. So he calls it a little wedge. HA with an accent, C with a little wedge, EK. Yeah. The acute accent means that the vowel is long, and C with a little wedge is read as sh as in shek. So the pronunciation is ha shek and literally means little hook. The acute accent is called sharka, which means comma or little line. The guy who invented these names wasn't very imaginative, was he?
That's Robert saying that. That's not Abe calling this dude unimaginative.
So Robert continues in his message to us. Anyway, we are sorry to confuse the rest of the world with these symbols, but we blame Jan Hus for that. There's no accent, so I'm not sure if it
who knows what to say now. We've just got a lesson in what to do with accents, and I don't know what to do when I don't see one.
So we blame Jan Hus for that, and then he sends us a link to the Wikipedia page for Jan Hus. And he goes on to say, don't worry, he was burned at the stake in Germany for that. Or for some other thing he did. If you want to know the pronunciation of my whole surname, just ask Ben. He does a pretty good job pronouncing it at the end of every episode of his little podcast. All the best, Robert. P.S. Also, we have this little bad boy, and he includes a U with a little circle.
Umlaut.
Right about it.
No, umlaut.
No, an umlaut is 2 dots. This is just one, and it's not a dot. It's an open circle.
It's apparently
just above it.
U degrees out. In
U
Czech
degrees,
right
yeah,
now.
like the degree.
But it's directly above it and not off to the side.
Right in the middle.
Well, Robert, thank you for that, and everybody go check out Titanium Physicists to hear Ben say it, because Robert, you didn't tell us how to do the E with the hashek on top of it, so
that's right.
Still confused.
I hope I got it right this time.
Thanks for writing in. I have an email as well to finish out the show. My email is from William S., and it is concerning something I said in a previous episode 253 to be specific. He says, hey folks, this is directed towards Ryan. Which, by the way, I just want to throw that out there. We've been getting more and more emails sent through the Contact Us form on the website, which is great. You know, just keeps everything nice and neat, organized. But it is so helpful when I'm trying to plan this segment if you tell me who this email is pointed at when you write it in.
Yes.
Even if it's me, it makes my life much easier. So he says, hey folks, this is directed towards Ryan. Love the show, and it was cool to hear the story about the Yellowstone River, near and dear to my heart, covered in episode 253. We talked about parasitism in the Yellowstone River and what that means. It's a really interesting story. Go check it out. Just have one minor correction about something Ryan said in regards to fishing when the PaleoPOWs were discussing the economic importance of the river. Ryan said that, quote, private landowners, if the river runs through their land, have exclusive fishing rights, end quote. In Montana and many other states, flowing waters are open for public use even if they run through private land. This is dictated by the Stream Access Law in Montana. The law says that in general, all surface waters capable of recreational use may be so used by the public without regard to the ownership of the land underlying the waters. It also states that recreationists can use rivers and streams up to the ordinary high water mark, end quote. Essentially, as long as you do not walk on private land to get to the river, you can wade in and fish as you please. Some states have slightly different laws that essentially say the water is public, but the stream bed is private, meaning you're allowed to float through it on a boat, but not allowed to step out into the river. I hate to be nitpicky, but I wanted to dispel... Nobody hates to be nitpicky, William. Nobody will, I guess you have an email.
People love
to be nitpicky. Don't just own the nitpickiness. Just say I wanted to clarify and add precision. But I wanted to dispel the notion that someone could own exclusive fishing rights to fish in a public body of water. Lakes are a different story because they can be private if they exist entirely within private land. A river, especially one like the Yellowstone, flows across many different types of public and private land, and thus all fish within it are a public resource. Thanks for all you do, Will. So I don't remember exactly what I said, but I know that I had spent some time up in the Yellowstone River area in Montana with a friend of mine who actually did work with a stream management type company. I don't remember exactly what they did, but one of the things that he talked about was helping landowners develop their stream beds for better fishing access. And so the way he talked about it, and maybe even some of the things that he said that I misinterpreted when it came to getting on the land versus just wading through the creek or the river, confused me about what it was that is private versus public. So I definitely did misspeak in that episode. I went back and checked with my buddy in Montana who had been doing that work, and he was kind of like, yeah, I hope I didn't tell you the wrong thing, but what Will is saying here is definitely the right thing. So Will is correct. I was mistaken and misspoke, or just didn't know what I was talking about. Shocker, I know. So yeah, I appreciate Will writing in to clarify him, or I'm glad we could get that one sorted out.
Thanks, William. Thanks, William.
He put his name as William in the name form on the contact form, but then signed it as Will.
Yeah. I said thanks, Will, but I had closed the.
So we're gonna call him Billiam.
Billiam.
I'm sure not Bill, not Will, not William. I am.
But Will, you are.
That's definitely what he goes by.
I hate to nitpick. No.
But he signed it, Will.
All right. Joe. Well, I think that about wraps it up for this episode.
Yeah.
What do you think of those interviews, Joe?
Oh, they're great. Looking forward to listening to them.
No, you've already heard them. You were here on the show with us the whole time.
Oh, right. Yep. That's the thing.
You gonna go watch that movie?
I watched it when you paused the podcast for me.
Oh, that's right. I paused it for you so you could go watch it.
Yeah, it was really good.
That's why we were here for 90 minutes, just sitting here drinking beer.
Yeah.
All right.
That's why you're noticeably more drunk than you were before the segment.
So, Joe, do you have anything to plug?
Yeah. So after episode 299, when we were talking to Sarah from Skype a Scientist, my sister, who is a 5th grade teacher, actually signed up for a match with a scientist, and she's gotten one. So she's looking forward to having a chat with an engineer of some sort. With her class, they're going to be building CubeSats soon. So she's pretty excited about that coming up.
Very cool. So you're saying the podcast had a positive impact in the life of a child?
Yes. Or it will.
Technically.
Soon. Technically speaking.
Technically speaking.
It will
I hope
soon.
she has more than one child in that class.
It's a very special school.
Ratio is 1-1.
She
faculty
is, she
to
is
students.
the private teacher for the child of a baron. Very wealthy land baron. All right, well, I think that about wraps it up for this week's show. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us and participating in all the wonderful ways in which you do. And yes, teachers and researchers out there, Skype a Scientist signups are still available, so don't hesitate to go sign up if you think you might want to chat with a scientist or chat with a classroom, not just in your area, but around the country. It's really cool. I just got matched with my classrooms, and I'm looking forward to reaching out to the teachers and finding a time to chat, and it's all good. So go watch Human Movies, Elements, podcasts, Skype Scientists, everything out there that's good in the podcasting world.
And then go have a drink. You deserve it.
You deserve it, and you can come back here, same time, same location. Wait, what did they say on the end of Batman? Same science time, same science channel for a whole lot more science.
Sort of.
Oh, I like that. That might be the new sign-off if we hadn't already recorded several episodes ahead of this one.
Best laid plans of mice and scientists.
The best laid pans? What? Are you laying down pans for the mice in your house? Yes. No wonder they keep coming back.
Yep. Pans full of food.
Joe, it's pandemonium.
Visit sciencesortof.com for show notes, links to all the stories we talked about, and ways to interact with the hosts, guests, and other listeners. Science Sort of is brought to you by the Brachiolobe Media Network of Podcasts, with audio engineering by Tim Dobbs of the Encyclopedia Brunch podcast. That's all for this week. See you next time on Science Sort of.
Pandemonium means all the demons.
Oh, that makes sense. Oh. That checks out.
I thought it meant bread from the demons.
Nope. Pan is in all, not pan is in bread. No, your kolpandemon is your companion demon, but pandemonium is when you have all the demons.
No, I like Abe's version better.
Thank you.
It's your bread demon?
Bread demon.